Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking your time and take part into today's conversation. So without any further ado, we have over 100 people that have reserved. So hopefully they will join as we go, but in efforts to save time and also to carry on with our discussions, I trust that we should start now with our discussions. And I will introduce myself before, and with me I have Mrs. Palesa Chabalala, who is our Chief Operations Officer. She will be introducing our panelists, and our panelists will present or share their presentations after they have been introduced by Ms. Chabalala. And we will have a Q&A session right at the end of our presentation sections. So without any further ado, again, I'd like to thank you for your time that you have taken to participate in this conversation tonight. My name is Malibongwe Jingana. I am the founder and CEO of Afrimed. Afrimed is essentially born of the desire to work to build capabilities that transform the delivery of healthcare and how surgery is performed in Africa. And so we design, we develop, and now are setting to manufacture medical devices here in South Africa, primarily for the Africa region market and expansively for other low, middle income regions across the globe. And our focus is in 3 segments of healthcare products by application. That is the medicines and treatment delivery systems, laparoscopic surgery, advanced electro and robot-assisted surgery, with an overall mission of making health and surgical care accessible, inclusive, and affordable and equitable in Africa. This is a bold statement that we operate by, and that is to establish the medical technology manufacturing sector in Africa and to align and translate the operations of that sector to efforts aimed at reducing the burden of disease in Africa and to strengthen the health systems across Africa for preparedness of current and future disease outbreaks. My duty tonight is to lay the basis of our discussion and to curate this meeting. So please allow me to share just the basis of the narrative of this meeting today. So as Africa and the rest of the world amble past COVID-19 pandemic, it is without a doubt that the pandemic has accentuated weaknesses in the health ecosystem, exposing the underinvestment in public health infrastructure by low and middle income countries of the world and the inadequate coordination in response to public health emergencies, both at regional level and at the global health scale. This suboptimal response to COVID-19 has exposed the imminent power disparities in the global health system, where Africa is underrepresented in positions of influence and decision-making. This was clearly evidenced by the unequal access to vaccines for Africa at the peak of the pandemic, as the continent relies on imports from other regions of the world for almost all its vaccines demand. Less than 1% of the continent's vaccine demand is manufactured in the continent, with only 7 countries who have companies that operate in the different positions of vaccine manufacturing value chain. Furthermore, communicable diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV have long been amongst the most prominent contributors to the disease burden in sub-Saharan Africa. The region, however, like most low and middle income countries across the world, is undergoing a rapid epidemiological transition characterized by the shift in communicable diseases to an increasing predominance of chronic non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, chronic respiratory diseases, chronic kidney diseases, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, mental and substance disorders across the 46 member countries of sub-Saharan Africa. In addition, the region is expected to see one of the largest increase in mortality globally due to the non-communicable diseases, with most adult population exposed to at least one risk factor for the non-communicable disease, including tobacco consumption, harmful alcohol use, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, obesity, or high blood pressure. So 1/3 of the disease burden is surgically amenable, and the rest can be treated or managed through pharmaceutical therapy and other forms of treatment. However, paucity of access to equitable, sustainable, and affordable health and surgical care in the region remains a major challenge to effectively address the growing disease burden. Albeit the majority of the population in the region, sub-Saharan Africa, residing in areas within 2 hours of a major hospital that could theoretically carry out the bellwether procedures such as cesarean deliveries, laparotomies, and open fracture treatment, etc. The need for surgery still remains high and continues to grow, and is estimated to be about 22% to 25% of the region's population. That is about 257 to 298 million people that require surgical care in sub-Saharan Africa. This is attributed to many factors, including reduced government investments in public healthcare infrastructure, limited and unequally dispersed surgical workforce in the region. Of course, not all treatment is surgery. You see, the other speakers will elaborate more on other therapeutic interventions, but aggregately, the high dependence of the region on imports, which account for an unprecedented 96% of all medical devices, surgical instruments and equipment, vaccines, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and more that are required to deliver health and surgical care services to the population of the region. So this high dependence on imports lands the health system in great volatility, as the economy of sub-Saharan Africa is largely influenced by global events and economies from which the medical technologies and healthcare products are sourced from. These persisting challenges demonstrate the urgent need for Africa to strengthen its health systems by building capabilities that ensure better response to and preparation for the alarmingly increasing disease burden and potential global threats such as disease outbreaks. This can only be done through the establishment of localized production of medical devices, therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics, a strong public health workforce, and strengthened public health institutions, and mutually beneficial public and private sector partnerships. So if we look at why Africa has not industrialized in health, especially in the healthcare sector, the diagnosis is not straightforward, but I have a prognosis for this case. So since the colonization of Africa, the continent's manufacturing has been and still is heavily concentrated on extraction of unprocessed mineral commodities. Excuse me. In contrast to other regions of the world, such as Asia, Europe, and America, where the economies consist mainly of manufacturers, African economies have adopted a strong dependence on commodity exports, an economic model that was left behind by occupying colonial powers, designed to make Africa a reliable source of raw materials for their industrial economies. So this is supported by a state of commodity dependence report that was published in 2019, which illustrates that 89% of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa are still commodity dependent. And this chronic dependence has been a long observed phenomenon. But African countries have not fully managed to reverse the trend and manufacture locally. And it is evident that this model has contributed to the large difference between Africa's growth rates compared to other global industrial economies. The obvious threat of the mineral case, this dependence on mineral commodities, is the volatility of the global price shocks. So simply put, if we are importing from China, China is billing us at their own currency, depending on the strength of the currencies at the time which the products are purchased. Will either bear the high cost of the products, or will have a substantial progress in depending on the currency strength. So, but much more intriguing into this is the fact that countries that heavily rely on mineral wealth often have weaker institutions, spend less on health, education, and are more corrupt. This is evidently the reality of the African continent, where we have a failing health system, inadequate social security, stagnant education system, and despicable level of corruption, and many other challenges that the continent faces. So in recent years, many African countries have demonstrated a renewed commitment to industrialization. So this was the African Continental Free Trade Area as part of the broader agenda to diversify the economies of sub-Saharan Africa, to build resilience to global economic events, develop productive capacity for high and sustained economic growth, which will create employment opportunities and substantial reduced poverty. This renewed commitment by African countries to promote industrial development is timely, but requires an urgent and well-defined action to transform industrialization in Africa. So my comment is that it is unless African countries redefine and transform industrial development and how the state government can actively promote a supportive environment for such development through targeted infrastructures, financial policies, and enabling regulatory framework, and preparing for a more digital future, significant industrial capacity may never take hold in Africa, and this window of opportunity is closing. So it is without a doubt that if Africa is to achieve health, welfare, and economic development, then much greater effort is needed to localize manufacturing of essential medical technologies, therapeutics, and vaccines to drive universal access to safe, affordable, and surgical healthcare, as a fundamental aim to equitable healthcare access. So it is in this basis that we convene today to discuss the innovative ways of building capabilities that strengthen our health systems across Africa. So our first speaker that we're going to introduce today is Professor Salume, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Chabalala, to introduce Professor Salume. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for joining us this evening. Prof. Salome Maswime is a full professor and head of Global Surgery Division at University of Cape Town, and an obstetrician and gynecologist. She's a World Economic Forum Young Scientist, a member of the Academy of Science, South Africa, and a Next Einstein Fellow. She's the Vice President of Women in Global Health South Africa and President of South African Clinician Scientists Society. Board member and chair of research of the Health Systems Trust in South Africa, Global Council member of Lifebox, board member of FALF and SHAWCO, and a member of FIGO Committee on Ethical Aspects of Human Reproduction. After specializing, she completed her MEd and PhD in obstetrics and gynecology. She did a postdoctoral research fellowship at the Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. She has a diploma in project management and certificate in leading organizations and change from MIT. She completed the Young Physicians Leadership Program with ESMT Graduate Business School in Berlin. She's a section editor of PLOS Global Public Health Journal. She has received numerous awards for her research contribution to maternal health, including the Trailblazer and Young Achievers Award by South African President in 2017. In 2020, she listed in Mail and Guardian's 50 most powerful women in South Africa. In 2021, she was named among 20 young shapers of future in health in medicine by Encyclopedia Britannica. In 2022, won the Tumani Cora Prize for Research Excellence. Over to you, Prof.
Right. Thank you so much, and really excited and glad to be here tonight, and really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this discussion. It's not every day that we are discussing strengthening surgical systems, and so I was really excited when I got this invitation, because it's obviously work that's very close to my heart, and it's also work that we teach in our global surgery division at UCT. And so I've titled as the theme of the day, building capabilities and strengthening health systems. And so I'm just going to take you through a journey of surgical health systems and global surgery, and some of the innovative work that we have done. And so just to add on what has already been shared, what we know is that approximately 1 billion people in Africa lack access to safe and timely surgery. And so the idea of having access to surgery, especially on the African continent, we're the ones who have the least access. And so it's important that we start to look at how we can provide safer surgical care. When people don't have access to safe and timely surgery, babies die before they are born, mothers die during childbirth, people end up with disabilities, people end up blind, cannot walk, cannot hear, cannot see. And so there's so much at stake for a continent that is not able to provide safe and timely surgery. And it also means that people cannot fulfill their socioeconomic potential, and if they are not able to be treated for the diseases and injuries that they have. Some of the work that we did and was recently published was on surgical outcomes for women in Africa. And in this study, which was a sub-study of the African Surgical Outcome Study, we found that women were in Africa were 2 times more likely to die from surgical complications than women in high-income countries. And this has been quite consistent with the research that we've been doing in this area, which really points out to health systems issues. In my work, which I've done for many years on cesarean section, what repeatedly comes out is that women in Africa have are prone to complications that will lead to premature death. And so it's important that we start to understand the why, because the problems are not really in theater most of the time. The problems can be and should be sorted out outside of the surgical theater. And so this says to us that the problems that we are trying to solve, we have to focus both on the work that we're doing in theater, which part of it is quality improvement, capacity building. But at the same time, we have to understand the populations that we serve and to provide care that will reach those that are not always reached by the systems in which we work in. So the modern surgeon not only has to think about themselves and the safety of the surgery that they provide and working on being a good surgeon, but they have to think about access, think about the people that are not in the theater, people that are not in the queue, people that are not looking for care, people that are not showing up, who are sick as well, or who may have sustained injuries and were not able to make it in time or arrive delayed and have delayed access to care because of the situations in which we live in. We have to think about quality and beyond the resources which our governments provide, what measures can we have in place to improve quality? And of course, the safety, not just the safety of the surgeon and our hands and our skills, but the safety of our theaters and the places in which we work, because when we start having a lot of complications, it also points out to the safety or the lack thereof in the places that we work in. We also understand that that there are determinants of health. It's not just about the care that we provide and the surgical expertise and training that we have. There's patient factors, there's economic factors, there's political factors. You would have remembered during COVID that when the taps to alcohol were closed, we also had fewer trauma patients arriving in our hospitals, which was a political way of preventing adverse outcomes or preventing injuries and reducing the number of people that we see in our hospitals. And how do we respond today to the political determinants of health so that our communities can be safer and that we won't have as many people coming into our hospitals? So we've defined global surgery as this interface between surgical services, surgical systems, and surgical leadership. And today is obviously a lot around surgical systems and this whole idea that surgery is part of public health, and we need to have public health systems in place that are going to give us better capacity to give good surgical services. Health system strengthening is the work that we do to try and improve, promote, restore, and maintain healthcare. And so the same applies to surgery. But unfortunately, the surgeons are trained to deliver surgical services and are often not trained around issues that improve our surgical systems, such as infrastructure, leadership, human resources, financing, and information systems. And we are saying surgeons should also be trained on these things, and those who work within the surgical system, because ultimately you can be a great surgeon, but you're really as good as your system. Some of the solutions that we've proposed as Africans for the challenges that we see in Africa is increasing the number of surgeons. We've got a population which needs, there's an unmet need for surgery, huge populations that need access to surgery. And so one of the things that we can do is increase the capacity and increase the number of surgeons. We can increase the number of surgeries that we do, and this has been proposed as innovating ways of improving access to surgery, improving our surgical outcomes through quality improvement, and decreasing the need for surgery. And I think this is where our public health specialists can also help us a lot and help us to design innovative ways of preventing injuries and surgical diseases, and then increasing the cost effectiveness of surgery as well. So these are the 7 areas that we work across, and we try as a global surgery unit to come up with global surgery solutions across these areas. Biomedical innovation, which is an important part of today. This is us designing and working with the biomedical engineers to design new equipment that is designed for LMICs, that is designed for the society that we live in, that is affordable, and user-friendly for our communities, using technology, designing apps, designing things that would make access to care better, or even providing mediums such as health education apps so that our communities will be better educated. Social innovation is an important part of what we do. And then all the capacity building. We work as surgeons, as obstetricians, as anesthetists, and sharing these skills with medical officers, with junior doctors, with community healthcare workers, so that they can better provide better services. Community engagement is a big part of what we do, because we believe if you don't educate the community, if you don't start with prevention, you are only going to be increasing the skills to provide surgery, but ultimately we want healthier communities, and we should be working towards prevention. And then quality improvement, and in certain areas, it's simple things like trying to reduce the decision to incision time so that more people can get access to surgery. And then working with the policymakers, who of course are in a position to put in place laws and legal frameworks for decisions or interventions that will save more lives. So these are just examples of some of the things that we have done, which range from designing health education apps to capacity building and teaching using devices, to creating devices. During the pandemic, we designed a device with the biomedical engineers, the UCT visor. And the reason why was because there were no visors available at all at the time. We all remember what was happening. And so our surgeons in theater needed a homemade visor, literally, and we were able to do this with the surgeon in mind. And of course, a lot of community workshops, educating community leaders and community healthcare workers on cancer and various other diseases. So there's innovation goes beyond devices and apps and technology. And it's really just a way of bringing change and bringing solutions. And so I want to end off with saying it's important that we're all part of providing meaningful and reliable solutions that are also affordable for those who need them the most. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Salome. And I think you have wrapped up the importance of having a proper surgical care access for the majority of the population. And also you sort of highlighted the different stakeholders and the key roles that the different stakeholders in healthcare play in addressing the issues that we have in surgical care access, and how the industry as well, which is I think is the bigger part of this conversation today, is how do we, as different stakeholders across healthcare, pull together towards one direction to address the issues that we currently have in our health systems, in our surgical care systems as well, and expand innovations, not only just innovation for the sake of designing an innovation, but innovations that speak to our communities, that speak to our problems, that addresses the need, and also that are cost effective and effective as well. So thank you very much. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of this section, and anyone that wants to raise a question, anyone that wants to raise a comment will be allowed at the end of these presentation sections. So we will now move to the following speaker, Dr. Khontle Molele. She'll be addressing diabetes overview in Africa, and also specific regions in Africa. So I'll hand over to my colleague, Balesa Chabalala, to introduce Dr. Khontle Molele. Thank you.
Thank you, Malibonge. Dr. Khontle Molele graduated from Glasgow University Medical School in Scotland, UK, and completed her specialist training in general internal medicine, diabetes, and endocrinology in Nottingham, UK. She returned to Botswana in 2009 after a 7-year period during which she worked as a consultant physician in the West Midlands. Dr. Molele is based in Lenmet Bokamoso Private Hospital in Botswana, where in addition to running a private diabetes and endocrinology practice, she is also the hospital superintendent. Dr. Molele's clinical interests include diabetes in pregnancy, cardiometabolic disease, and thyroidal illnesses. Outside clinical work, Dr. Molele is a chairperson of the Diabetes Association of Botswana, a non-profit organization affiliated to the International Diabetes Federation, which provides support, education, and advocacy services to people with diabetes. She sits on the Governmental Audit Committee, which oversees ministerial audit, internal audit activity, and is also a member of the school governing body at International School in Mahikeng in South Africa. Over to you, Doc.
Hi, Dr. Molele, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you are there. Thank you. We can hear you now.
Super. So I just need to figure out how to share my screen. Is my screen sharing?
Not yet. There is a green button there that you can share at the bottom of your...
Okay. I got it. Share.
Yes, your screen is sharing now.
Oh, super. Okay. Apologies for that. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Dr. Hunka Molele. I'm a physician and endocrinologist. And I am going to spend a bit of time talking about strengthening health systems. And I will in particular speak about diabetes in Africa. So before the COVID pandemic, there was another pandemic which really shows no sign of abating, and that's the non-communicable disease pandemic. So traditionally in low and middle income countries, so-called developing countries, the healthcare focus has always been on communicable diseases or infectious diseases. So your TB, malaria, and HIV, but it's become evident over time that non-communicable diseases are presenting a big problem. So these are the top 4 non-communicable diseases. There are others, but these are the top 4 because they're responsible for 78% of mortality related to NCDs. And I am going to talk about diabetes. So NCDs are generally known as lifestyle diseases because they are related to a change in lifestyle, which is in turn related to increased urbanization and rural-urban migration. But there's an element of causality which is beyond the patient's control, and that's related to genetic makeup. But the problem with NCDs is the potential for huge impact on economies by curtailing the lives of the economically productive sector of the population. So talking about the diabetes epidemic, diabetes is a disease characterized by high blood glucose, which is in turn caused by the absence of insulin or deficient insulin action, generally insulin resistance. And the purpose of treatment of patients with diabetes is to normalize blood glucose in order to allow the patient to achieve a life free of complications. And there are 2 large groups of complications. We've got microvascular or small vessel diseases, or complications. So these are your eye complications or retinopathy, kidney complications or nephropathy, and neuropathy, which is where the nerves to the feet and sometimes other parts of the body are affected. So those are your microvascular complications, but there are also macrovascular or large vessel complications. So that's stroke, angina, heart attack, peripheral vascular disease. But the thing here is that the microvascular complications are responsible for morbidity or ill health, but the macrovascular complications are by and large what cause death in our patients with diabetes. So this is data from the IDF, and in 2021, they estimated that 1 in 10 adults aged 20 to 79 had diabetes, so a total of 537 million people. But here's the thing, 3 in 4 people with diabetes live in low and middle income countries such as Botswana and such as South Africa. And if you look at projections of numbers of people with diabetes over the years, you will see that the global prediction is that the numbers of people will increase everywhere, but the low and middle income countries, and particularly Africa, is disproportionately affected with a projected 134% increase in numbers of people with diabetes in the years 2021 through to 2045. So this is South African data, and so there are 3 data sets here, 2000, 2011, 2021, and you'll see that the numbers of people with diabetes increase, as does the prevalence, and that's shown quite nicely here on the graph on the right. I've got Botswana data as well, and there are really only 2 data sets here. But the Botswana data is interesting because there has been a decline in the number of people with diabetes from 2011 through to 2021, with a similar decline in the prevalence. And you see that on this year. Now, this data is interesting because it goes against the grain. It's almost the only locality where there has been a decline in the number of patients with diabetes, and we'll discuss the reason for that later in the talk. But looking forward, you can see the predictions for 2030 and 2045, and you see that inexorable rise in the numbers of people affected by diabetes. So the message here is that diabetes disease burden is increasing, but also that Africa is disproportionately affected. So what I'd like to do now is talk about the rule of halves, which is a framework which can be used to discuss to describe the burden of diabetes and the unmet clinical needs along the disease pathway. And what this rule of halves says is that of all people with diabetes, 50% are undiagnosed, and of the 50% who are diagnosed, 50% do not receive treatment. And of those who receive treatment, only approximately 50% will achieve their treatment targets. And of those, only 50% will achieve desired outcomes. And the desired outcomes are that life free of complications that I spoke about earlier. So in an ideal world, the rule of halves framework would show marginal differences between the pillars. And this would mean that the needs of people with diabetes were being met. So you wouldn't see this attrition as you move from pillar to pillar. And if it's applicable to our sub-Saharan Africa population, it would mean that we are far from achieving desirable outcomes for the majority, and that there is significant morbidity and mortality in communities with that resulting economic impact that I spoke about earlier. So this is just to show you the number of deaths. This is from the IDF Diabetes Atlas again. So the IDF probably has the largest global diabetes data set available. So this is the data on deaths, and you can see as age increases that yes, a significant number of older people die from diabetes-related conditions, but there's a significant attrition rate or mortality rate in the economically active population, age 30 to 60, and this is a problem for developing countries. So what are the challenges then around diabetes? Well, this is lifted straight out of the IDF Diabetes Atlas, and there's a dearth of data in the African region. And this means there are gaps in the IDF estimates, and it's difficult really to plan meaningfully without accurate data. And this dearth of data may actually explain that disparity that we saw in the Botswana data between 2011 and 2021. The second challenge is the diagnosis of diabetes. And if you recall the first slide, but also the South African and the Botswana data, approximately 50% of people with diabetes may not know they have the condition. And this is a problem because these individuals don't know they have diabetes, they don't access care, and they don't receive the life preserving and life enhancing care that they ought to. The third problem is access to care, and this indeed was the World Diabetes Day theme in 2022. And access to care refers to the fact that significant numbers of people with diabetes are unable to access the care that they need, the care that they should receive from nurses, doctors, dietitians, and nurse educators. And this is the care that empowers them to continue their self-care at home. Because if you think about it, we see our patients maybe every 3 months or 6 months, and the appointment is invariably less than 30 minutes, usually 20 minutes or less. And in that time, the patient must receive care for the next 6 months until their next visit. And in the time that they're alone, should be empowered to deliver that self-care. And that package of care is not universally acceptable. Alongside difficulties with access to healthcare professionals, access to medication is a real challenge as well. And this is due to a whole host of reasons, but cost is one. Tablet therapy is expensive. The cost of insulin is also expensive, and it's catastrophic for some families who have to decide whether to buy insulin or to buy food. And this is really unacceptable. And even where medication is available, the range of available medication might be limited, because what we do now is manage blood diabetes beyond just blood glucose control, because there's a need to include therapies which reduce the risk of death, which reduce mortality. And these therapies are again costly and not universally available. So what are the solutions? The solutions are manifold, and they will form a part of today's discussions, but I'll state a few that have been raised by the talk that I've just gone through. We obviously need data. We need good data, good quality data to aid with decision making. And for this, we need surveys and we need registries that we can interrogate. We also need public health policy that includes not just treatment of diabetes, but also disease prevention. And we also need to improve access to healthcare professionals and access to medicines. And it's important to look at the medicines that we use and where they come from. Are they available locally? Are they manufactured locally? And are there alternatives to imported medication? Consumables are also very important. So our patients with diabetes use glucometers to monitor their blood glucose at home. And the cost of glucometers is significant, but the cost of glucose monitoring strips can also be catastrophic. And what really is the true cost of glucometers? Are they available locally or are they imported? And again, is there an alternative to importing these consumables that we need for our patients? In closing then, in summary, diabetes is, the disease burden is increasing and Africa is disproportionately affected. And there's a strong need really for strategies and policies to flatten the curve and reduce the number of people developing diabetes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khontle. You've touched on scary stats regarding diabetes. And, potential might not even be the word that we may expect, especially for industries that are old as human civilization, like healthcare. But when it comes to healthcare access in Africa, it's not even, we're still saying that the health industry has a potential. And we've been saying that for quite some time, and no actual tangible actions from either from the government side to address the disease burden, more especially the inclining growth of diabetes and the other diseases that result from that as well. So thank you very much. We're going to allow questions at the end because I've got so many questions, especially on insulin manufacturing in Africa. I know most first-line treatment medicines are not even manufactured in the continent, and yet they're in the first line of our therapies for diabetes. Thank you very much, Doc. We're going to allow questions and comments right at the end. We're going to move straight to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Professor Sandile Kamanga, excuse me. So I've known him from Rhodes when I was still I was doing pharmacy at Rhodes. So he's one of the people that really inspired me to find Afrimed and to have such a strong passion when it comes to public health and the interventions that we take to address that. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Palesa, to introduce Professor Sandile Kamanga. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malibongwe. Professor Sandile Kamanga, the Dean and Head of Faculty of Pharmacy at Rhodes University. Professor Kamanga holds several qualifications in the field of pharmacy, including a master's and a PhD in pharmaceutical drug design and development. Over to you, Prof.
Colleagues, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. And words alone are not sufficient to really articulate the kind of gratitude that I have in being invited to be with you this evening. And I just spoke to Malibongwe, just saying to him, we've just finished our graduation ceremony for our students just after 5 today, and I had to quickly get back to this business. And I just want to share my slides with you. Just starting from, if you allow me. The topic of the day is strengthening health systems through transforming surgical care in Africa. my name as presented by Palesa. I'm a student from two universities, from the University of Swaziland and also from Rhodes University. And that's where I am right now as a Dean of the Faculty of Pharmacy. And the outline of my presentation is as follows. I'll try to briefly talk about drug design development in the world and the different stages of drug development and drug discovery and the manufacturing overview. And we are going to spend some few minutes on the current capabilities to design, develop, and manufacture active pharmaceutical ingredients in Africa. What are those challenges? And I hope our discussion will really give something that we can engage on. For those who really the subject is outside their domain, we use the term active pharmaceutical ingredients when we refer to drugs. So us in the design, discovery, and manufacturing space, to say a drug is fine, but outside the spaces, a drug it's something else, if you really understand what I'm talking about. But it's also important to really give it a proper or a therapeutic meaning, that it is any molecule that affects biological processes and is used to prevent, to diagnose, or to treat a disease. So that's the active pharmaceutical ingredient. They come from two spaces. The first one is natural origin, and we can also synthesize active pharmaceutical ingredients. I do have examples that I can share with you, the drugs that are of natural origin and the thousands that have been synthetically produced. And what are the things that we want with these active pharmaceutical ingredients? And I've listed them there. Just because of time, I'm not going to go through all of them. But it's important to bring an active pharmaceutical ingredient that is safe, which is not toxic, and also that is synthetically feasible. And you are not going to go and start designing, manufacturing an API that will cost you a lot of millions. And also the processes, the manufacturing processes, if they are not sequential, logically, and all of those, that is not going to work. So it's important, therefore, that in the main, when you talk of an active pharmaceutical ingredient, you have quite a number of the presented parameters that I've actually spoke about. And two things that are important when it comes to active pharmaceutical ingredients and what the body is going to do to the active pharmaceutical ingredient. So we put that under pharmacokinetics. So in pharmacokinetics is the body is going to absorb, the drug is going to be distributed, it's going to be metabolized, it's going to be eliminated or excreted. So it's what the body does to the drug, but in pharmacodynamics is what the drug is going to do to the body. And that is very, very important to isolate when it comes to active pharmaceutical ingredients. And both of these, they've got elements, parameters that we use to actually see what an active ingredient, the parameters associated with absorption, how much of it will be absorbed, distributed where, and how it's going to be metabolized in the liver, kidneys, etc. When is the active pharmaceutical ingredient is going to be eliminated? So the time course of that API in the body is very, very important. And where is this API going to come from? It starts with the drug discovery. It starts with the design. It starts with the development. And I've presented these as drug discovery. And now once you have a molecule of interest, you go through the preclinical development stage, and also you go through the clinical trial stages. And there are different phases when it comes to each of these elements that I've presented here. So in the drug discovery, it's a big field where you really need a medicinal chemist who are going to help you, especially when it comes to finding a hit molecule that you are going to take forward up till you get a lead molecule which you are going to be working with. So finding a hit molecule as well, it's not an easy process. It's quite a complex process which requires a lot of professionals to actually come up with that. And what is it? It's a molecule that will elicit a desired activity. So we say that it has potential, for example, to reduce blood pressure. So then you need to conduct screening assays about it. So once you have a kind of an understanding where you are going to with this hit molecule, and you come to looking at it in terms of improving the structure of that molecule. So optimization is very, very important. And there it comes to in silico studies, that is computer aided kind of experiments that need to be conducted. Again, it has to be very strong individuals with a very strong medicinal chemist qualifications who are able to look at it in terms of how selectivity is going to be looked at. How are you going to be able to reduce toxicity? Issues of water and lipid solubilities are very important as well. And also to improve the pharmacokinetic properties in general of the API, which is the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and also excretion or elimination of that hit molecule. So you then, after the optimization, you'll be getting the lead molecule. Colleagues, these processes, they don't take a day, 2 days. They take years up till you actually get the right molecule, which you start again going through mathematical modeling, statistical designs, and all these in silico studies. You look at it in terms of the relationship between the molecule, the ligand, and also receptors. Then you continue with the optimization until you finally get a drug candidate. I spoke about 3 important phases: the drug discovery, the preclinical, and also the clinical phases, the clinical trials before you get a product. Of interest, I really want people to actually understand this. In the drug discovery stage, it's important to understand that you may start with about 10,000 hit molecules, lead molecules. But the final one that actually goes to the clinical trials, it's about 5 compounds. I'll start again. You may start with about 5,000 to 10,000 compounds initially that convince you that they do have a therapeutic effect. They can cause lowering of blood pressure, for example. But to get into the clinical trial stages, you find that you go with 5. What happened to the others? You lose them along the way. And therefore, that is very, very important to understand that when it comes to investment, a lot of money would have been placed during the drug discovery phases, the stages. And that money needs to be recouped somehow. So by the time you actually get to approval of a drug, statistically, you'll find that it's only 1 drug that actually comes from the 5,000 to 10,000. So it really speaks to the efficiencies of these processes. When it comes to the pharmaceutical landscape, these are not efficient systems that we talk about. They involve a lot of target identification, assays, development, lead generation, and it takes time. By the time you start with your discovery, you want to have lawyers that are going to be with you so that you put a patent together, which may be for about 20 years. So imagine by the time it gets to the regulatory approval, that will be about 12 to 15 years. you are left with 5 years in your patent before it elapses. So what do you do then in 5 years if you have spent billions of dollars in getting that one new drug molecule to the market? To be able, therefore, for research and development to continue, it means, therefore, that your blockbuster molecule, the one that actually gets into the regulatory approval stage, it's going to be very expensive because it comes from thousands of other compounds that would have failed. So to be able, therefore, to continue with the research and development, you need to support research by ensuring that you also have pharmacoeconomics, people who are actually going to help you understand how much the process from the drug discovery phase to the drug approval phase is going to be. I'm going to give you numbers here so that you actually appreciate and understand where we are coming from. I'm not going to go through these slides, but it's important to understand that the clinical stages from the drug discovery, the preclinical and the clinical, this is the longest when it comes to the whole portfolio of bringing an API or drug or a molecule into the market. Phase 1, you can even start with phase 0, which we sometimes call a microdosing. It actually comes before the phase 1 study. Phase 1, where you actually have healthy volunteers who are involved. What you really want to understand with the phase 1 is you want to understand the PK parameters, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination of the API. And then in the phase 2, you now move from healthy participants, you go to just a few hundreds of patients who are suffering from that particular disease. And again, you need to, if you get through that one, you can go to phase 3, where you now have several thousands of patients from a diverse spaces in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, etc. So what's the aim of that is to collect sufficient data so that when we actually put it in the pharmacometrics, in here we look at it in terms of a population pharmacokinetics. In population pharmacokinetics, it's when you obtain data from diverse group of people that you can actually use if in this particular phase, the drug passes this phase successfully, it's ready for registration. The registration process as well, it requires a lot of activities. And in the phase 4, which is what we normally do, we really want to fully understand the molecule as it's out there. It's a post-marketing side that is in terms of looking at it in terms of how it performs when it's out there. So all these are very important stages when it comes to getting a product. Let me get now to the pharmaceutical industry. I am bold about this and saying it, that this industry is one of the most successful businesses in the world. I'll just give you data about this. When it comes to the first one, the IT business, it's doing very well together with the telecommunication industries. When you then comes to arms and ammunitions, those are the ones as well. When it comes to oil and gas and minerals, those are the ones as well. It will be a big mistake if you don't include the pharmaceutical industry along these ones as in the top 4 when it actually comes to the market segment of what drives the world economies. Looking at the financial reports of 5 of the top big pharma companies, I don't work for them, but allow me this evening, colleagues, just to highlight these companies that I actually have on my slides. I'm not going to say their names. You can see them in the last 10 years. Just one of these companies, when you think of the budget of some of the countries in Africa, you cannot match these companies in terms of their total portfolio. Then it just shows you the real drivers of these different kind of economies. A case in point that we can all remember, just in the last 2 years when it comes to vaccines, the whole world had to come to a stop because vaccines, they had to be delivered to communities. So I am really putting these as a bold statement, the last one there, that puts the pharma industry in the top 3, top 4 most profitable industries in the world. So our eyes, therefore, if you're an economist, you need to start looking at this. On average, to bring a product to the market, it takes about $2.6 to $5.5 billion on average. So you can do your conversion, 5.5 times close to 20. And that's exactly the kind of portfolios in terms of rands. You can easily go from 30 billion rand to 100 billion rand. And you remember what I said, you start with those 5 to 10,000 molecules, but it's only one molecule that would actually get the real approval without any toxicity data, safety profiles, and all of that. So it's important, therefore, to start understanding. I said earlier on that some of the budgets of African countries, you cannot match some of these big pharma industries. So which country, therefore, do you think is going to take all its budget to invest in the pharmaceutical world? So that's exactly what I was saying. The first bullet point there, it says this industry, when it comes to drug discovery and development, it's a very expensive exercise with low efficiency. The low efficiency part, it talks to the thousands of synthesized molecules up till the time you get one drug that is going to be approved. And the process takes a very long time, 10, 12, 15 years. And now you have about 5 years to close your patent. But we saw something very exciting when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccines in the 2-3 years down the line. And the reason for that, my 2 points, they are very important for us to actually help to calibrate the kind of conversation that we have, is because governments and companies, they accepted the level of investment risks. There are other vaccines that were out there, but when it comes to their efficacy and all of that, it's still a debate even now when we actually start talking about the vaccines and all of that. So they were willing, therefore, to take a big plunge, and it was justified because it was a pandemic. It was a time of crisis, and there were unprecedented levels of public funding which were made available thanks to those countries who really embarked on this. And also when it comes to the regulatory bodies in all these countries, they were very open to all these other proceedings that accompany drug regulation and drug registration. And the conversations around that, it was really happening so fast that it was possible just in the record time to start having these molecules or these vaccines coming up. So I've already highlighted that this is a high-risk business, and looking at any portfolio that you are managing and you come with a molecule, you get to the lead, you get the drug candidate, which will be able to put together in the manufacturing stages until you get the final product. It has to pass all the parameters of the pharmacokinetics. It must be one with a good bioavailability. It should not have toxic metabolites. It must have optimum half-lives. It mustn't be short, it mustn't be long half-lives. And I've said that looking at it in terms of the time that it takes to get a new molecule into the market, newer methods, we have them now called in silico tools. What are in silico tools? These are computer-aided models that are used to fast-track the drug discovery, the drug development, where you actually are able to do docking of if you've got a drug, and you can have your imaginary kind of receptors that you have in terms of the ligand receptor interaction, and using that kind of understanding, you'll be able to optimize and get a final product. This is just a very important slide for me to bring to you to actually understand that the drug discovery processes or approaches, there are so many, we look at serendipity, we look at chemical modification, we look at using high throughput assays. The first one, serendipity, what does it mean? It means it's a trial and error. It's just by chance. You all remember the story of penicillin. The Fleming early in the 1930s, 40s were able to come up with this antibiotic. So it was just by trial and error. Look at it in terms of the sildenafil, which we all know as Viagra. Viagra, it's actually a drug that was discovered for blood pressure. Because of its good side effects, on the other aspect, it's actually the side effect of sildenafil that is actually used for it in the main for its popularity as Viagra. So that's a side effect of sildenafil. It is actually a blood pressure molecule when it actually comes to getting it. Other approaches when it comes to drug discovery, I'm just going to use one example of ranitidine. Ranitidine actually came thinking of it, chemical manipulation of cimetidine, we're able to get ranitidine. Pindolone, coming from propranolol. Aspirin, coming from salicylic acid. You'll be able to manipulate the structure of salicylic acid, acetylate it, you'll be able to get aspirin, which is acetyl salicylic acid. These cancer drug, paclitaxel, it's the newer methods now when it comes to screening, when it comes to high throughput assay studies, we'll be able to get an anti-cancer drug. So it's much quicker, efficient process than it was before. I'm not going to go through this slide, but I can actually easily explain it. Then the fourth one is what we call rational drug design. With rational drug design, we can also look at it in terms of drug repurposing. So drugs that are already out there on the market, we can use them just simply manipulating them. It's a smartest and cheapest approach of drug discovery, but it's very, very complex. What is it that you do? You identify a biological target. So that is more of when it comes to the disease stage, so a huge micromolecule that is involved in the disease. So then you get a ligand. In this case, the ligand is going to be the one that approaches this biomicromolecule. The ligand is going to be the hit or the lead molecule that has been discovered. So you look at the interaction between these huge micromolecule and also these hit molecule when they come together. Manipulation and structure optimization is going to be able to happen to that. What's your interest there? You want to have a drug molecule that is going to be selective, that is not going to be toxic. Issues of solubility are very, very important. You don't want a highly lipid soluble drug. So we really badly at the moment with most of the molecules that are discovered are sparingly soluble or high lipid soluble. So we then need to start thinking of how we can actually solubilize that drug. And that actually speaks to issues of permeability. You also don't want a freely soluble drug because you are also going to have problems because the membranes as well are kind of, you have lipid membrane. So that is also something that you think about when it comes to drug development, etc. The last one that is very, very important, we are now in the 5IR. It's important to draw from our understanding of artificial intelligence and we invade the space of drug discovery in all aspects so that we'll be able to have efficient system to be able to reduce the number of years from the drug discovery stage, from the hit to the drug molecule. From the manufacturing point of view, where are we, therefore, when it comes to getting a product on the market? You need to have an API, which is safe, which is non-toxic, with all the parameters that I've reported on. So the API on its own is not a product. You get an API, you incorporate excipients, which in layman terms is called ingredients. You need to do studies to ensure that the API is compatible with the excipients. So you therefore need to do pre-formulation studies, before you formulate. So this, again, it's a huge portfolio when it comes to what we do in the pharmaceutical spaces. In pre-formulation, you need to do a drug excipient interaction, use sophisticated instrument, your NMR, your DSC, and Raman, XRDs, and all of those, to be able to be sure that there are no changes that take place once you have placed an excipient with an API. There could be structural changes which may then be unwanted at the end. Then it comes to the production. You need to have proper laboratories or facilities to be able to do that. A huge quanta of quality analysts, the quality control laboratories needs to be good. It needs to be broad. It needs to be robust. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be sufficient to be able, because you are telling the world that you'll be able to do this. Packaging and labeling, these are broad areas as well. The regulations, they are not friendly, I can tell you now. You need to start thinking of supply chain, the logistic aspect of it. Moving, we all knew when it came to the vaccines in terms of expiry, the shelf life, and all of that. Some of the products, they will need cold chain. Some of them, they need to be transported to areas of, let's think of the equator, think of the Middle East, where temperatures go to 40 degrees, go to the lower 50s. What do you say, therefore, when it comes to stability? So the shelf life, therefore, could be easily accelerated because of heat, etc. So from the packaging aspect, you need to have that in mind. I can take, for one, a suppository, a rectal drug delivery system. It melts at 37 degrees because it has to melt at the rectum. So imagine, therefore, if you take these, it becomes a dosage form in the equator where the temperature is 40 degrees. So from a packaging point of view, therefore, it's not going to work because these are lipids. It has to melt when it actually is placed on the rectum. I'm just using in a figurative sense so that we actually need to understand it. Stability, you need a huge team that is going to do shelf life, expiry date, estimation, and all of that. We do that as well. And also the manufacturing tools. These are big, gigantic companies. It's not just easy to start looking at it. I've already spoken about the challenges. It's a highly regulated sector, and it's understandably so because you are going to be administering medicine to a fragile group of individuals, patients. So any element or any item that you place in their body, and the body needs to respond. It's a lengthy process. I've already given you the number of years and the times, how much it actually takes for one product from the first step to the last step, from 2.6 to $5.5 billion. It's very expensive. You need to invest the kind of money that is invested in this when it comes to drug discovery, drug development, and the formulation and the manufacturing. The budgets are more than some of the African countries. In fact, the top 5 pharma companies, their budgets put together, Africa as a whole still lags behind these big 5 pharma companies. You can put all the countries in Africa together, their budgets are lower than those big 5 pharma companies. So you can actually understand that healthcare, it needs concerted effort, it needs the will from governments, it needs the whole world to coordinate this. I've already spoken about the serious consideration when it comes to the pharmaceutical industries. Coordination issues. You cannot be just one part of the world that wants to do everything. You need to establish yourself as one. For example, you are going to be looking at API for one thing. Concentrated. If Africa, all the regulatory agencies, the Department of Trade and Industries, Departments of Health, and many others that will be involved to actually come up with something meaningful for Africa, that will be very, very, very important. Reliance on human resources. You need specialized skills, this. Coordination as well is very important. Do we have the capacity? Is it sustainable? Are we able to manage this in its quanta and all of that? So all of these are issues that we need to start thinking about. This slide, it really speaks to, I've collected data from the current challenges that Africa has in terms of skilled labor shortage, chemistry and process engineering, that's important for that. Manufacturing, the risk associated with this. Do we have the technology? The rising investment cost of innovation, I've already spoken about that. You see globally that even the big pharma companies, they also apply what we call mergers and acquisitions. Why do they actually go through this? Because this industry, it's pressed for technology, it's pressed for money. So pricing pressures, digitalization, you need to be agile when you work in these spaces. Cybersecurity is very, very important because companies can actually get into your database, get your secrets in terms of a patent and all of that. Most importantly, do African countries have the political will to embark on these activities that we have spoken to? Let's put together budgets of all the health departments or ministries in Africa. How much do they spend on pharmaceuticals in the last 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? Do we have a plan of Africa 2063? What is it that we want to achieve as Africa? I'm just posing these as big questions, not only for ourselves here, when we go to our different spaces, so that we start having that conversation. The ease of setting up of these companies, how is that it's possible? I hope that also I also spoken to effective research and development in higher education. Do we have support? Do we have relationship between the pharma companies and also the industries and also higher education? So all of these are big questions, which I hope that we have teased this topic, we'll be able to have a solid discussion around it. I obtained some of the information from references, and I do have them on request. I'm able to share with you, and a big acknowledgement to my employer, Rhodes University. I'm using their internet, I'm using their computer. Right now, I'm using their office. I appreciate each and everyone for listening to my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was a very in-depth explanation. And on a very serious note, what you've just did now, the explanation, it really takes into the seriousness of manufacturing in Africa. The challenges that are very, very large, especially when it comes to investment. And so it requires not just one company, not one research facility, but a combination of everyone, holding hands together. And I think the essence of this meeting today is to discuss that, is to realize that we as stakeholders in healthcare, in different specialties that we are in order for us to advance healthcare in Africa, we all need to pull in the same direction. We all need to have the same mindset. So thank you very much, Prof, for highlighting those kind of things. And we'll allow, again, Q&A right at the end of this presentation. We're left with two more speakers. And after that, we'll allow Q&A. And to recap, Prof. Salume spoke about what healthcare is in Africa, global surgery principles, challenges that are faced in access to healthcare for greater population of Sub-Saharan Africa. And Dr. Khonhle highlighted the four leading diseases in Africa with more scrutiny on diabetes, and how all of that plays a role, how healthcare in all of that plays a role, and in addressing these disease burden in Africa. And just now we just had Professor Kamanga, who's spoken at large about drug discovery, drug design, and up to the manufacturing and also regulatory processes as well that are involved, and highlighted the hefty investment that are needed and the political will that is needed in Africa in order to advance Africa, and left us with questions that we should ask ourselves. Where do we want to see Africa? What do we want to happen in Africa? And also in-depth analysis of what it takes to manufacture a final product and put a final product into market. The following speaker is Professor Musa Mushabela. I'll quickly allow my colleague Palesa to quickly introduce Prof. Mushabela. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malibongwe. Professor Musa Mushabela is Professor of Public Health and Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, an esteemed academic and clinician scientist. He was awarded the Pillar Award in 2022 by Public Health Association of South Africa for his contribution to public health in South Africa, and a ministerial special COVID-19 award for COVID-19 science communication and public engagement. Prof. Mushabela is a chairman of governing board at the National Research Foundation, a member of the board at the South African Medical Research Council, chairperson of the Standing Committee on Health in Academy of Science of South Africa, Health Commissioner to the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal as one of the 7 multi-sector commissioners on the Premier's Provincial Planning Commission. Prof. Primarily's contribution has been in the improvement of access and quality in healthcare to combat infectious diseases in relation to HIV and tuberculosis, and in the areas of health systems, services, and policy research. Professor Mushabela is now focused on implementation science, which cuts across multiple disciplines and involves the design, implementation, evaluation of complex interventions in healthcare services and programs, and seeks to improve access, quality, and equity in healthcare for resource-poor settings in sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you very much, Palesa. I hope colleagues can hear me. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. So today I want to just speak a little bit about the value of death, and this dovetails very nicely with where Professor Kamanga has picked up. I think on the one hand, we have heard about the burden of disease and the need for interventions. And the value of death really speaks to the problem, the broad problem of innovation that we are talking about today, which is the fact that we've got needs on the one hand, needs for products, for therapeutics, for devices, for vaccines, but we as the program director indicated, we import a lot because we are not able to manufacture. And you've already seen this value chain of development for products, medical products. And when we look at this of course combines both a pathway for the research, but also a pathway for manufacturing. So you've got the development aspect at the top, and then you've got the need for facilities at the bottom. And we, during COVID-19, we reviewed the manufacturing landscape in South Africa, specifically for vaccines, because in many ways, Africa and South Africa was seen to be responding very well to the COVID-19 pandemic, but not so much in terms of the development of products. Now, if we are going to succeed, we need to make sure that we are able to innovate in a way that speaks to our own needs in Africa and locally. And I think all the speakers before me have indicated this priority. At the moment, there is no platform that we have that is able, and in any country, there is no system of innovation that is able to take a product that requires an active pharmaceutical ingredient or API, as Prof. Kamanga indicated, from the research side through to development, through to preclinical studies, through to clinical studies, and through to commercial manufacture and to the shelf. We are not able to complete this value chain in Africa. And capacity of certain areas of excellence is there. So for example, we can do much of the sort of upstream work around research, identifying molecules and so forth that can even offer some promise to go into preclinical studies, but it becomes a bit of a dead end after that. We are also able to do clinical studies, clinical trials. South Africa is very well known for its capacity to do clinical trials, as we saw also during COVID. And this can be clinical trials for all the different products. With HIV in the past, we did major clinical trials for antiretroviral treatment. With COVID-19, we did clinical trials for vaccines. And we've also done trials and evaluation studies for diagnostics and other devices. And at the end, more recently, we've also been seen or demonstrated to the world that we've got the capacity to package, fill and finish right at the sort of ultimate downstream of the products, as we saw with Aspen do in terms of COVID-19, and some of that also with BioVac. We have this problem, and I think, again, it was mentioned earlier that in the past we could do this development. If you look at the animal research domain, we have got some capacity to be able to complete the value chain, but not so much in terms of human research. And in the past, we used to be really strong, but that whole infrastructure and system fell apart because we shifted a lot towards importing products instead of manufacturing and developing here. I think on the surface of it, a good case was made for why that was necessary. But if you look deeper, we know that it was a better idea for South Africa and for Africa as a whole. Yes, there are many concerns and questions around the issues of market in Africa and so forth. But as colleagues have already indicated, we also know that there's quite a bit of corruption that has led to all these other contracts and tenders that involve importing products, and as a result collapsed our own industry. So this is a problem that we have, that we've got this gap where we don't really have good facilities for GMP facilities for the development of APIs and at scale, and really linking and therefore completing the full value chain. We also know that we work in very fragmented ways. In the research upstream, we work in silos. The researchers have their own place. The laboratory people work on their own. The clinical people work on their own. We're not connected. The biotechnology industry is also isolated. It's not linked to the university researchers. The people that do development, take product through development, are mostly in industry. They are not linked to the upstream research. So research and development are not necessarily well coordinated, which is something that, as indicated, Big Pharma has, because they tend to build this this sort of systems in-house. Whereas actually the opportunity is much bigger when you actually look at the whole landscape of what we can offer in the higher education sector or the science research landscape. But we don't really have good linkages with industry. Organizations like the CSIR, the Council for Scientific Research and Industrial Research, they did not really fulfill the mandate of helping build the value chain of taking products from conception to the shelf, even though these are things that they were expected to do, and they themselves also became competitors in the landscape. And instead of building the infrastructure, the little infrastructure that was there, they went and set up their own elsewhere for a number of reasons again. And so this fragmentation that we have and the unnecessary competition that we have ends up making it difficult for us to build the social capital that is necessary. Everybody wants to have their own piece, and we end up working at very small scale in multiple areas, and we can never really, in the way that we are disorganized, compete with the sort of industry within the industry that we need to compete in for Africa to be able to develop products. And also, I think I find that even this whole issue of how when a product is patented and that needs to then sign the NDAs and be taken for into the biotechnology and into the industry to be tested and to be developed further, we are not able to agree. There's always tensions that are really unnecessary. When you look at our competitors abroad in the systems that they have, they work for them and they work for the culture that they have of innovation. We don't have that. And so a lot of products are sitting on the shelves that are patented, that have not been developed. And they are not able to find their way into development. The skills for development does not sit in universities, and yet universities are the ones that are allowed to own intellectual property and so forth. So we have to think about this whole gap where we need to start thinking about how to share, how to exchange, how to collaborate in a way that is selfless, I think, if we are going to succeed. Otherwise, we're all just gonna stay in our little corners and silos and perform at a small scale. The world around us is also shifting. You know, one issue is looking at this linear sort of pathway of the value chain, but the other one is the ecosystem for science and innovation, the sort of national and continental system for innovation, which needs to or ought to exist as an ecosystem, does not really exist as an ecosystem. And we are not even at a point where we are able to operate a triple helix model. To this day, we're still talking about how government should play this role or that role, regulators should play this role or that role. And these are not conversations that we should be having if we have an ecosystem that is conducive to innovation. And remember, innovation does not exist as an idea. Innovation only happens once a product exists. If there is no product, then there is no innovation. And so we can't be talking about innovation when we're still kind of talking about molecules that have not been taken through development. Innovation is innovation in hindsight. It's not innovation prospectively. It's only innovation once you have the you know, as Prof. Kamanga said, a blockbuster that is in the market. You've innovated. But if you still have all these molecules, many molecules that have not really been developed, there isn't really innovation there. And so we know that from what we have learned so far is that for us to succeed with the innovation around the devices that we need or products that we need academia, business, and government to work together. And that's the triple helix. We are not even there. We don't have a functional ecosystem that is conducive in terms of the triple helix model. And the world has already moved to quadruple helix model, which basically means that you now have active participation of society. And in Africa, that's what we need. We need to determine our needs for product development based on the reality on the ground. And that way we can develop products in a way that suits our own people and our communities. Now, you may argue that, well, this will limit your market share and all of that. And that is probably true. But at the same time, if we are not going to create demand, we will always struggle with market share in Africa. And oftentimes we are going to develop things that are not necessarily needed locally. So if we can't really achieve and operationalize a triple helix model, the question I have and often ask myself is whether we can actually operationalize a quadruple helix model. We are so fragmented within academia alone and between business and government. Imagine now if we have to bring communities to help inform and guide the development of products. But if you take lessons from COVID-19, you will also see that society plays an important role in whether a product is going to be trusted or not. And if there is continued mistrust of products that are developed through the sector, the biotechnology sector, because of societal mistrust, be it of investors or because of political reasons or religious reasons or whatever the reason might be, then we are going to struggle with moving forward with innovation in Africa, particularly in Africa. So that tells you that we've got to have communities and local communities as partners from the beginning. But none of us here in the room generally would be comfortable at starting off with a development of a product in partnership with communities on the ground. Yeah, some people might be related. Proudly South Africa might be linked much better to communities. But if you are linked to communities, then you're not quite well linked to academia, or you're not quite well linked to a government. If you are linked well to academia, you're not quite linked to business. We have a fragmented system that we've got to face and in resolving as we move forward. And we need to be intentional in doing this. And a lot of it will require selflessness. I use this slide to demonstrate that Africa can be successful if people come together and work together. All of us here will know about the impact of the research that was done on variants and sequencing variants, not just in South Africa, but in Botswana and also elsewhere in Africa. And if we can have that much of an impact that can be felt globally, then it means that there is potential. But what people don't know is the amount of collaboration that it took to produce that work in South Africa alone is huge. It brought together so many players. Now, it is in this collaborative effort that I want to argue that we saw the success that we saw in recognizing the research and the quality of research that we can produce in South Africa. There's also a product that was developed, a vaccine candidate that was developed in South Africa, but never plant-based, but it never saw the light of day because, again, we did not have the facilities to manufacture APIs. But I do want to say that no one should actually believe any assertions that Africa does not have the capability, but what we lack really is a model of partnership a model of an ecosystem, a model of a value chain that is complete and connected enough to be able to help us move products through the whole process of development. But we've got pockets of excellence here and there. And yet there's so much potential that if we were to successfully build this system of innovation, we would actually be able to have an impact, but not only have an impact on the world, but have an impact in terms of addressing the priorities that we have. It's not a small thing for South Africa to know what variant is dominant here so that you can tailor your approaches to the needs that you have. You can decide on the kind of vaccine that you're going to use because it's relevant to your context. You're not just going to take anything that is being used elsewhere. So this is important and it does offer potential. I've mentioned in the quadruple helix the importance of communities. Now, most of the work that we do in R&D is informed by typically what we consider STEM, the science, technology, and engineering and maths of science that underpins the science that we do. And there's a shift in the world that essentially calls for introduction of the arts and humanities. And this is so suitable and appropriate for Africa because most of us make a starting point of the work that we do, the needs of our people. We are very human in our thinking, in our philosophy, and yet the R&D that we do can be so disconnected to the humanity of the work that we do because we have adopted frameworks and approaches that may be inappropriate. And I think that adopting a STEAM approach that includes the arts and the humanities, the social sciences from the beginning is a model that's going to likely work in Africa, which is why I still think that the quadruple helix, complex as it is something that we need to endeavor to achieve. Yes, you might be trained in a very biomedical area or biotechnological area of work, but in order to understand the product that is needed in your local clinic, you have to go to the local clinic, find out from the health workers there, what is it that they have? What is it they don't have? What is it that they need? You then develop a product based on their needs. While you are there, you talk to the patients, you find out what is it that they are likely to accept or not accept. Oftentimes, we may even have to start thinking about the affordability of those communities so that you know how to pitch a product. What's the point of developing a product that's going to cost thousands of dollars that your local community is not going to afford? And also, if you need to develop an expensive product that is not going to be feasible for marketing in your own context, then you could go into an investor model that does not only include private equity and private funders, but you could bring in philanthropy as you develop these technologies and devices that you need. These are ideas that you can only start to bring in when you have a human-centered approach. And our approach to technological development and advancement in Africa needs to adopt a human-centered approach. And therefore, even the framework of learning and education needs to shift from just STEM and actually be STEAM. I want to wrap up with this issue of co-production. And again, here, I want to argue that if we are going to really develop products that are useful for us, we need to develop them in partnership. If you want a surgical instrument, work with the surgeons, work with the obstetrician, work with the nurse, work with the anesthetist, work with the patient. We've got to co-produce innovation if we are going to produce the kind of innovation that's going to have an impact. I think intuitively we know this, but because it is so cumbersome and inconvenient, and it's not in keeping with our notion of how we understand the current landscape of innovation, we are not able to get past what we already know, but we've got to push those boundaries. And it does mean that we have got to deal with issues of conflicts of interest. You will find that someone who comes from the private sector, they are much more interested in profit and profit margins, as you could see with the big pharma and other pharmaceutical industry. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I think that it is the reality of that industry, but we can find solutions. As I've indicated, you could even bring in philanthropy in order to help deal with issues where the profit margin is reduced because the target population is not well off. And also, I think that there are issues of power dynamics that have to be addressed. There will be others that have their own interests that are not necessarily aligned. Academia will have different interests, communities will have their interests, government, regulators, and so forth. But it also means that we've got to manage and approach partnerships in a slightly different way. We've got to think about how to adapt, how to accommodate others. But all of these things are things that we can only do if we are committed to co-production of knowledge and of innovation. Let me finish off with why I think it matters. I think that we can talk about the disease burden, we can talk about the clinical needs, the capacity needs, we can talk about the sort of pharmacodynamics and kinetics, we can talk about manufacturing and the problem with manufacturing, we can talk about regulation, all of these things we can talk about. But at the end of the day, I think that we know that if it does not translate into impact for people on the ground, then it doesn't matter. And we are faced with the reality that we live in an unequal world. And those who need these interventions, who need to benefit from the innovation, are not benefiting. And those examples have already been given. For those of us who have vested interest in ensuring that there is equity and that there is justice, we have to be intentional and go the long mile of achieving that. Otherwise, our communities in rural areas will remain poorer. Our marginalized communities in society will remain marginalized. And at the end of the day, the whole continent of Africa will not benefit because the formula is already skewed in a way that does not favor them. That is the reality that we have. And we've got to find a way to put aside or accommodate our differences in philosophies, in interests, in views of the world, in perceptions, in beliefs, in order to achieve, in order to find the common ground that's going to help us reshape the landscape of innovation in South Africa, but also in Africa as a whole, so that we can see more benefit for our communities. From where I stand with the different caps that I wear, the work that I do, and the interest I have in reshaping the innovation system and landscape, I just think that we can have many of these conversations, but if we do not commit to equity, then it all does not matter. Thank you. I'll stop there. Back to you, Chief.
Thank you very much, Prof. You've put it quite well, and it really takes us to really decide where we want to see our healthcare and what measures we're going to put in place and what commitments we're going to work to make in order to advance healthcare. And I think the profession of healthcare in all the aspects of it is it's something that is selfless, something that you do because there is a need, not because there is a gain. Even for us in private sector, you know, as manufacturers and designers of medical devices, we have to cater into the greater need of society than the profits that we would make in business of medical devices. It's beyond that. It's a calling that one have to make. We are running out of time. We're going to overlap by a few minutes. My apologies for that. And then I'm going to ask Mr. Mashimbe to quickly wrap up and conclude in our discussion and put really the value of localized manufacturing, and also to just put a stamp on what Professor Mushabela have just said, that it takes all of us to put into our words into action. And over to you, Mr. Mashimbe. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I'm going to be brief, as I ideally need to be off the call by 8:30, so I'm going to be brief. Good evening to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. Pardon my voice. I've come off a grueling 72 hours. I've hardly slept. We hosted the Buy Local Summit and Expo, so it's been a difficult 3 days. So to get into it, we're a Buy Local campaign, and what we seek to do is to advocate for the uptake of locally made products and services, and obviously that talks to ensuring that there's sufficient capacity in the country to meet the demand that we are hoping to stimulate from those that make purchasing decisions. This phenomenon of buying local is a tried and tested phenomenon, and it happens all over the world. It's not unique to South Africa. In fact, you have campaigns that exist for countries, regions, and even towns. And the best case study, I think, of how important localization is the United States, which established the Buy American Act in 1933, as well as the Buy American Act in 1982, and they followed that up with the Buy American Improvement Act in 2017. And in fact, it didn't just stop there, but it continued even beyond the Trump administration, where even President Biden, when he came into office, he signed into law provisions to encourage, and to strengthen Buy American provisions. And this talks to the well-documented trade wars between China and the US. I think the US is of the view that if they're able to make anything themselves, they will not allow it to come in, especially if they are able to meet the demand that exists in their country. And so this is not unique to South Africa at all. If you look at South African manufacturing in context, because it's a labor-intensive industry, I think it's important that you look at the contribution that it makes to the GDP. It's currently standing at 13%, but for those of you who know these industries and its subsectors very well, you will note that it used to contribute about 20% at about 1994. And so we need to get this industry together with its subsectors to a level where it can create sufficient direct jobs. And so why is localization important? I think it was touched on quite a few times this evening. So if we're able to get those who are able to invest in production capacity in the country, will then create much needed new job opportunities. And with the demand that comes from it, we can
Mr. Mashimbe, I think you're
even the entry-level jobs, because of the level of automation required and the level of skill required at entry level, what you would get would be, much higher paying lower skilled jobs. With that 10% increase in investment, you can create about 75,300 jobs and 11,500, in other industries as part of that multiplier effect that comes into play when you look at manufacturing and its subsectors. When you look at us as PrideSouth in the context of we have a buy local company in the form of PrideSouth, which I'm a part of, and we have 4 key focus areas. So we look at buying that happens in the public sector. I know that in this industry, the biggest consumer is the public sector. And so you need to aggregate the demand in the public sector to ensure that you can, get this industry going, and in the process, try and you try and make sure that with that aggregated demand, you support industries so that they can achieve economies of scale and they can be competitive and compete with all of those products that come from India and all over the world, where especially those traditional sources of medical devices or pharmaceutical products that we consume as a country and economy. And we know that the investments required in this country, whether it's in APIs on the manufacturing side of things, you really have to, when you know that there will be uptake. We also lobby for the private sector to buy locally made products, and this talks to a lot of what was discussed today in terms of who makes purchasing decisions and what solutions we're looking for. So the private sector also will be a consumer of some of those proposed solutions that we looked at tonight. We seek to also educate the general public about the importance of buying local, and lastly, we promote accessibility of locally made products and services, and whether it's the general public, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, those who choose to buy local need to know where to find the products, and that's where we come in. What we stand for as PrideSouth Canada is 4 key values. 1, the product itself must be made in South Africa, in that it must contain sufficient local content in terms of raw materials and components, and some of those costs, the input costs, the value addition as best as possible must happen within the borders of South Africa, especially where the raw materials and components and machinery required is available in the country. The quality aspect is very important for us, in that the products must be able to meet or satisfy the need for which they are sourced. The 2 are softer issues, but they're important, in that companies that affiliate with us have to ensure that they help us preserve the environment and they reduce the carbon footprint as best as possible, and that they treat their workers fairly in accordance with the labor legislation of the country. We have a focus on access to markets, and maybe let me just quickly touch on this and then I can pause. In that, what we then do as PrideSouth is we then look at the offerings from our members, and we advocate for the buying of those products, and we lobby extensively. So there's 3 broad categories of our access to market programs, which are part of our value proposition for all the companies that affiliate with us, in that we have an e-commerce strategy that talks to B2C as well as B2B. On a B2C perspective, we have all of those platforms where our members are able to list on existing platforms, high traffic platforms that are tried and tested. They can list their product on there. We pick up the tab, we enable them to sell on there, and they're able to then be accessed by those that they're targeting as consumers of their products. From a B2B perspective, in fact, this talks to this industry. There's a platform known as BizMed, and BizMed basically allows for the selling of pharmaceuticals as well as medical devices, pharmaceutical products as well as medical devices to be sold on that platform. And I think that is critical, especially when you look at the next step, in that we go out and we look for private sector procurement commitments. So we ask the private sector to give us commitments that they will buy local. Over the last 2 days, like I said, we had our annual flagship event. We received about 27 localization commitments, and one of those includes a commitment from the National Hospitals Network, which represents about 200 independent hospitals, and their procurement spend, which fortunately they received an exemption for the Competing Commission, will allow them to use that centralized procurement system to drive procurement such that it benefits all of them, and they can then, support localization. So they will all have a uniform preferential procurement system that will be centralized with them. So that helps. A platform like B2B then becomes critical in that regard. We have our own portal known as MAP, where the suppliers can list themselves, and buyers can then use that platform to find them and find the products that they're buying. We develop portals. We send our companies to expos and markets and trade fairs, sector-specific ones, especially where we know purchasing decision makers will go and find products. In the public sector, we do extensive lobbying, for preferential procurement policies to be adopted by public entities, preferential procurement policies that talk to, asking for local content to be included in the products that are supplied for government. So when they issue the tenders, they already need to say that they're going to give preference to locally made products. And this includes the work that we do with SOEs, and we partner with an organization known as the State-Owned Enterprises Procurement Forum, where all the heads of procurement for all government departments as well as all state-owned entities are represented. Yeah, I have a few slides, but I think that's not too important. Let me pause here, Program Director, and take questions if there's any, once you open up for questions. But I want to ask that maybe at Koratu or thereabout, I'll be allowed to leave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mashimbe. Ladies and gentlemen, we've surpassed the time that we're supposed to end the meeting. My apologies for that. I think in conclusion, colleagues, that there is an overwhelming evidence that access to healthcare in sub-Saharan Africa has been compromised by various challenges that impact negatively on the quality of healthcare across the subcontinent. And these challenges predate COVID-19 pandemic, but there are valuable lessons that we can learn from the era of the COVID-19 pandemic. And these dynamic challenges can be examined in two main perspectives: the clinician perspective and in the health system perspective. The clinician perspective looks at the burden of disease in 5 priority categories classified by the field of specialty: obstetrics, oncology, pediatric, anesthesiology, and perioperative care, and trauma as well. At surface level, this approach aims at addressing challenges faced by the fields of specialty in micro level, with an aim to have an outcome at macro extent. The success of this approach is directly dependent on the availability of healthcare workforce, medicines, and medical technology products in order to well address the disease burden. However, it is a different outlook when you look at these challenges from the health system perspective. By definition, a health system is the organization of people, institutions, and resources that healthcare delivers healthcare services to meet the health needs of a targeted population. Theoretically, in a system, you have an input variable that generates an output variable, and the result results to an outcome. At most basic, a health system is a system that government inputs a variable of investments and leadership that generates an output variable of health access and results to an outcome of health quality. The input variable determines the outcome of the system. It is the input variable of investment leadership in the health system that is the main challenge that we face in achieving equitable healthcare and having a resilient health system in sub-Saharan Africa. As Prof. Mushabela has indicated, it is only when we come together in different spaces of healthcare as shareholders of this sector, it is when we come together to push an agenda of advancing healthcare in Africa that will actually have a tangible results. And we have the capabilities that we have in development of different devices, in development of different APIs in the country. And we can advance in those and find innovative ways of developing those capabilities to a matured state where we can actually apply the tangible results from that. And so in conclusion, I want to thank you all for participating in this conversation. I think now I'm quickly going to allow for 3 minutes. Any questions, any comments that may arise? And if you'd like to ask any question, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you and then you can ask your question. And also on a very important note as well, I've noticed there is a greater need of us as different healthcare stakeholders to hold hands, because like Prof. Mushabela indicated, there is a huge gap between a researcher and the industry, between the industry and the government agencies and government itself in setting policies for healthcare. And so the more we close that gap, the better the outcomes and tangible outcomes that we will have. And I would like to allow any questions that arises. I really hoped that we could dwell more on Q&A, but because of the time and we've all overlapped the time that we've set for to end the meeting. So I'll take a few questions and anyone that has any question. All right, there seems to be no question or comment. And oh, there you go. Prof. Kamanga, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. It's not a question for me, really. It's a comment to really thank you for bringing us together with all our different really posture, and specifically talking about these. This should serve as a first step, not necessarily that there were no other steps for us to really go forward. All the presentations were really, I was captured by them, and in particular the issues of gaps that were highlighted. Now that we know about them, I think I always like to be in spaces where we know the starting point, what's the end point, what is it that we are taking with us. If we have the appetite, you've really given us something to chew now. And if you choose something, it means it has to land somewhere.
Yes.
Where it lands is a dry land, with a fertile soil, germination starts. What is it that we come up with here? We know we work in fragmented spaces, no linkages with the industry, academia, etc. We highlighted issues of coordination. Who does that based on these platform that we have created? It's got great potential, and it's really, we've isolated these, we've got the capacity, we can synthesize APIs, we've got very good research spaces of excellence, using Prof. Mashabela's words in here. But then from where, how do we take the gigantic step forward? I think that's what I would like from us as we conclude here. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Kamanga. And this is a first conversation or panel discussion of a series of other conversations or events that we'll have in future. So this first event was aimed at exactly what we have done, at identifying the current challenges that exist in Africa that may put jeopardy in localization of the medical manufacturing industry. So we have identified the problems from all different aspects of healthcare, from different stakeholders of healthcare. The next event will have a sort of a way forward in terms of what do we do now with these challenges? How do we, in detail, how do we further progress into establishing the medical device or pharmaceutical manufacturing industries here in South Africa and in Africa across. So definitely, Prof, this leaves us with something to chew on, and really energizes us to have something to really ponder upon, to say, what are we doing? What can we do to advance healthcare forward? Thank you very much for that comment, Prof. Anyone else as in conclusion before we end the meeting? Okay, there seems to be no one else. Colleagues, again, thank you very much once again for your time taken from your busy schedules. And also it's at night. I really appreciate the time that you have taken to participate in this meeting. And we have others that are coming up. The next one will be in person. We're hoping for October, September, somewhere there. And we'll definitely issue out invitations once again. And we hope that we can still have your time. And we will send complimentary or Thanksgiving packages to the speakers of tonight, to really appreciate you and thank you so much for your time that you have taken to participate in this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please allow me to end the meeting, and thank you very much once again, and have a good night.